Lucy had been so absorbed in what she was seeing that she startled at the sound, and when she turned she found that her arm had gone dead from leaning so long on the rail in one position. Drinny and Edmund were beside her. "Look," she said. They both looked, but almost at once Drinian said in a low voice, "Turn round at once, your majesties. That's right, with our backs to the sea, and don't look as if we were talking about anything important." "Why, what's the matter?" said Lucy as she obeyed. "It'll never do for the sailors to see all that," said Drinian. "We'll have men falling in love with the sea woman, or falling in love with the undersea country itself, and jumping overboard. I've heard of that kind of thing happening before in strange seas. It's always unlucky to see these people." "But we used to know them," said Lucy. "In the old days at Carpavel, when my brother Peter was High King, they came to the surface and sang at our coronation." "I think that must have been a different kind, Lou," said Edmund. "They could live in the air as well as under the water. I rather think these can't. By the look of them, they'd have surfaced and started attacking us long ago if they could. They seem very fierce." "At any rate," began Drinian, but at this moment two sounds were heard. One was a plop, the other was a voice from a fighting top shouting, "Man overboard!" Then everyone was busy. Some of the sailors hurried aloft to take in the sail, others hurried below to get the oars, and Rince, who was on duty on the poop, began to put the helm hard over so as to come round and back to the man who had gone overboard. But by now everyone knew that it wasn't strictly a man. It was Reepicheep. "Drat that mouse," said Drinian. "It's no more trouble than all the rest of the ship's company put together. If there is any scrape to be got into, it will get. It ought to be put in iron keel hauled, marooned, have its whiskers cut off. Can anyone see the little blighter?" All of this didn't mean that Drinian really disliked Reepicheep. On the contrary, he liked him very much, and was therefore frightened about him, and being frightened put him in a bad temper, just as your mother is much more angrier with you for running out into the road in front of a car than a stranger would be. No one, of course, was afraid of Reepicheep drowning, for he was an excellent swimmer, but the three who knew what was going on below the water were afraid those long cruel spears in the hands of the sea people. In a few minutes the Dwn Trdr had come round, and everyone could see the black blob in the water, which was Reepicheep. He was chattering with greatest excitement, but as his mouth kept on getting filled with water, nobody could understand what he was saying. "He'll blurt the whole thing out if we don't shut him up," cried Drinian. To prevent this, he rushed to the side and lowered a rope himself, shouting to the sailors, all right, back to your places. I hope I can heave a mouse up without help." As Reepicheep began to climb up the rope, but not very nimbly because his wet fur made him heavy, Drinian leaned over and whispered to him, "Don't tell, not a word." But when the dripping mouse had reached the deck, it turned out not to be at all interested in the sea people. "Sweet!" he cheeped. "Sweet, sweet!" "What are you talking about?" Drinian asked crossly. "And you needn't shake yourself all over me, either." "I tell you, the water is sweet," said the mouse. "Sweet, fresh. It isn't salt." For a moment no one quite took in the importance of this, but then Reepicheep once more repeated the old prophecy. "Where the waves grow sweet, doubt not, Reepicheep, there is the utter east." Then at last everyone understood. "Let me have a bucket myself." "Bucket, Reneth," said Drinian. It was handed to him, and he lowered it, and it came up again. The water shone like it was glass. "Perhaps your majesty would like to taste it first," said Drinian to Caspian. The king took the bucket in both hands, raised it to his lips, sipped, then drank deeply and raised his head. His face was changed. Not only his eyes, but everything about him seemed to be brighter. "Yes," he said, "it is sweet. That's real water, that. I'm not sure it isn't going to kill me, but it is the death I would have chosen, if I'd known about it till now." "What do you mean?" asked Edmund. It's like light more than anything else," said Caspian. "That is what it is," said Reepicheep. "Drinkable light. We must be very near the end of the world now." There was a moment's silence. Then Lucy knelt down on the deck and drank from the bucket. "This is the loveliest thing I've ever tasted," she said with a kind of gasp. "But oh, it's strong. We shan't need to eat anything now." One by one, everyone on board drank, and for a long time they were all silent. They felt almost too well and strong to bear it, and presently they began to notice another result. As I said before, there had been too much light ever since they had left the island of Ramadou. The sun too large, though not too hot, the sea too bright, the air too shining. Now the light grew no less, if anything, it increased, but they could bear it. They could look straight up at the sun without blinking. They could see more light than they had ever seen before, and the deck and the sails and their own faces and bodies became brighter and brighter, and every rope shone. And next morning, when the sun rose, now 5 or 6 times its old size, they stared hard into it, and they could see the very feathers of the birds that came flying from it. Hardly a word was spoken on the board that day, till about dinner time. No one wanted any dinner. The water was enough for them. Drinian said, "I can't understand this. There's not a breath of wind. The sail hangs dead. The sea is as flat as a pond. Yet we drive on as fast as if there was a gale behind us." "I've been thinking that too," said Caspian. "We must be caught in some strong current." Said Edmund. "That's not so nice if the world really has an edge and we're getting near it." "You mean," said Caspian, "that we might just, well, pour over it?" "Yes, yes," cried Reepicheep, clapping his paws together. "That's how I've always imagined it. The world would like a great round table, and the waters of all the oceans endlessly pouring over the edge. The ship will tip up, stand on her head for one moment, and we shall see over the edge, then down, down, the rush, the speed." "And what do you think will be waiting for us at the bottom, eh?" said Drinian. "Aslan's country, perhaps," said the mouse, its eyes shining. "Or perhaps there isn't any bottom. Perhaps it goes down for ever and ever. But whatever it is, won't it be worth anything just to have looked for one moment beyond the edge of the world?" "But look here," said Eustace. "This is all rot. The world's round. I mean, round like a ball, not like a table." "Our world is," said Edmund. "But is this?" "Do you mean to say," asked Caspian, "that you three come from a round world, round like a ball, and you've never told me? It's really too bad for you, because we have fairy tales in which there are round worlds, and I've always loved them. I never believed there was any real ones, but I've always wished there were, and I've always longed to live in one. Oh, I'd give anything. I wonder why you can get into our world and we can never get into yours. If I only had the chance. It must be exciting to live on a thing like a ball. Have you ever been to parts where the people walked around upside down?" Edmund shook his head. "It isn't like that," he added. "There's nothing particularly exciting about a round world when you're there.